The road had no business being so quiet. He came through the way a man surfaces from deep water, a violent inrush of cold air, the taste of pine and wood smoke, and beneath his sandals, not the cracked wasteland he had been thrown toward, but packed earth, damp with a rain that had already passed. The samurai landed in a crouch, one hand flat against the ground, the other already closed around the hilt at his hip. He did not draw. He listened. Aku's laughter still rang somewhere behind his eyes, that oily triumph as the black portal had swallowed him. Back to the future, samurai, where all hope has withered. But this was not the future. The air was wrong for it. There was no ash, no ruined towers leaning against a poisoned sky. Instead, mountains, black and folded against a sky, crowded with more stars than he had seen since childhood, and a moon so full and low, it laid a second, paler road across the dirt, one he knelt on. For a moment, one foolish, aching moment, he thought Aku's spell had failed backward, that he had been thrown home. The trees were right, the mountains were right. Even the smell of cedar and cold river water was the smell of the land where he had been born a prince, before the shape-shifting master of darkness had burned his father's kingdom and cast him forward through time. He rose slowly, and the hope rose with him, and he almost spoke his father's name aloud into the dark. Then the wind shifted, and he smelled the blood. Not old blood, not the honest blood of a battlefield or a hunt. This was something else. A thick, sweet, rotten undersmell that coated the back of the throat, that his whole body recoiled from without instruction. He had walked through 1,000 evils in his long exile. He knew the scent of a thing that should not be, and this land, so much like home it made his chest ache, was thick with it. Far down the moonlit road, a woman screamed. He was moving before the sound finished. The samurai ran without seeming to hurry, the long controlled stride of a man who had crossed continents on foot, and the katana stayed sheathed at his side as he came over a low rise and down toward a broken cart. A horse lay dead in its traces, opened from throat to belly. A man was crawling away from it through the mud, dragging a ruined leg, and over him crouched a thing wearing the loose shape of a person. Too many joints in its arms, a mouth split back past where a jaw should end, eyes the flat gold of a lantern with nothing kind behind the flame. It had a child's sandal in one hand. It was smelling it. The samurai had seen demons wearing many faces. He had never seen one built like this, and it did not matter. Evil had a particular stillness to it, a wrongness the body knew before the mind named it, and his body had known this creature from 100 paces off. The demon's head turned. It grinned wide enough to tear. "Another one," it said, delighted, in a voice like two voices layered badly. "You smell strange, little morsel. You smell like nowhere I've ever—" He drew. There is a sound a truly great blade makes leaving its sheath, a single clean whisper the length of the steel, and this blade made that sound and something more, a low harmonic hum, almost too deep to hear, the note of a thing forged for one purpose, and meeting that purpose now. The katana had been made by the gods themselves from the essence of righteousness, tempered to cut through evil and nothing else, and in a world that had never known it, it woke. The demon lunged, all elongated limbs and hunger. The samurai stepped inside the lunge the way water steps around a stone, and cut once, upward, and the blade passed through the demon's neck with no resistance at all. Not the resistance of flesh, not even the resistance of bone, but a total absence, as if the sword had simply decided that part of the creature should no longer exist. The head came free, and where a Nichiren blade would have needed the sun or the specific alchemy of the core to keep a demon from knitting itself whole, this cut did not close. The wound stayed. Black ash guttered from it like smoke off a snuffed wick, and the demon had time for one confused, almost human sound, a small "oh," before it came apart into cinders that the mountain wind took away. Silence rushed back in. The dead horse, the moon, the wounded man staring up at him. The samurai crouched, wiped the blade, clean already, it was always clean, and slid it home. "You are hurt," he said, in careful, formal Japanese that sounded a half-century too old to the man's ears. "Can you stand? If you are enjoying where this is going, a wandering swordsman with a blade that cuts only the wicked, dropped into the middle of the demon war, do consider subscribing. And tell me in the comments which world and which character you want thrown into this one next. Any universe, any hero, any monster. This one was written by me, and suggested by a viewer named Jaylengod. The next could be yours. The wounded man could not stand. His name was Kaburagi, a rice merchant bound for the next town, and his leg was broken in 2 places, and he wept as the samurai bound it with strips torn from his own white gi. He wept less from the pain than from the fact of being alive. My daughter, he kept saying. It took the cart. It took. She ran. I told her to run. Which way? The man pointed with a shaking hand toward the trees, and the samurai went into them, and found the child not far in, curled in the roots of a great cedar, with both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound, exactly as she had been told. She was perhaps 6. When the tall stranger knelt in front of her, she flinched back, and then something in his face, the stillness of it, the sadness under the discipline, made her stop. He held out one hand, palm up, and waited, and did not hurry her. And after a long moment, she took one finger of it in her whole small fist, and let him carry her back to her father. He was still holding the reunited pair, still crouched in the wreck of the cart with the merchant's arms around his daughter, and the merchant's forehead pressed against the samurai's shoulder in wordless gratitude, when he became aware that he was being watched. He did not move. He extended his awareness the way his masters had taught him across a dozen disciplines: the African stick fighters, the Scottish clansmen, the Shaolin monks, all the teachers his exiled father had scattered across the world for him, and counted 4 presences at the tree line, young. 2 of them radiated the particular clean intensity of trained fighters. 1 thrummed with a strange buzzing terror barely held in check, and the fourth was not human. He felt it the way he had felt the demon on the road, that wrongness in the blood, that stillness that should not be. But it was wrong, muddled. There was the undersmell of demon on it, yes, but tangled all through with something warm, something that hummed against the demon note, like a discord that refused to resolve. It was standing very still, and it was watching him hold a crying child, and it was not attacking. The samurai set the little girl gently into her father's lap. He rose to his full height, turned toward the trees, and let his empty hands hang open at his sides where they could be seen. They came out of the dark in a loose line. A boy in a checkered green and black haugri, perhaps 15, with a scar on his brow and eyes the reddish color of embers, one hand near the sword at his hip but not gripping it. A boy assessing, not attacking. A second boy behind him, yellow-haired, trembling, who looked as though he wanted very much to be somewhere else. A third figure that the samurai's eyes needed a moment to accept, bare-chested, muscled like a wild animal, wearing the tanned head of a boar over his own face, twin blades held low, and behind the scarred boy, half shielded by his body, a girl, and it was the girl who was wrong. She wore a gag of split bamboo lashed across her mouth. Above it, her eyes were the pink of a sunset going to violet, slit like a cat's, and where the moonlight touched the exposed skin of her arms, it showed the faint tracery of veins gone dark. A demon, unmistakably a demon. By every sign his body was screaming at him, and she was hiding behind a human boy to protect him, one small clawed hand fisted in the back of his haori, watching the tall armed stranger with naked, human fear. Fear for the boy, not of the samurai. The scarred boy spoke first. His voice was steady, courteous, and did not match his readiness to fight. "I saw what you did. On the road. That demon." He hesitated. "You cut it and it didn't heal. It just ended. That should not be possible with an ordinary sword." His nostrils flared, and the samurai understood that this boy was smelling him, the way the demon on the road had, reading something in his scent. "You don't smell like a slayer. You don't smell like anything I've ever—" The boy stopped himself, and inclined his head with sudden, disarming politeness. "Forgive me. My name is Kamado Tanjiro. This is my sister, Nezuko." The demon girl behind him made a small sound through the bamboo, an anxious, protective, entirely human sound. The samurai looked at her for a long moment. Every reflex a lifetime of war had built in him said demon, said draw, said cut. His hand did not move toward the hilt, because the blade at his side had been forged to answer one question, and only one, cleanly, without mercy or doubt. Is this thing evil? And standing before a demon who was hiding a human boy behind nothing but her own body, the sword at his hip was silent. It did not hum. It did not wake. It lay quiet against him, as it lay quiet before an innocent, and its silence told him what all his instincts could not. He took his hand away from the sword entirely and bowed, a full bow, from the waist, formal and deep, the bow of one warrior to another, across an impossible distance. "I am called Jack," said the samurai. "I do not know how I came to your country, and I fear I am very far from home." He straightened, and his tired eyes moved once more to the frightened, gentle monster crouched behind her brother, then back to the boy. "But I have just watched a demon murder a horse and hunt a child for sport, and I have watched that same darkness stand aside to shield you. I find I do not understand this world at all." A ghost of something that was almost a smile. "I would be grateful if you would explain it to me." Behind them, far down the valley where the mountain fell away toward the rails, a train whistle tore the night, long and low, and wrong in a way none of them yet had words for. They did not sleep that night, and neither did Jack. The boar-masked one, Inosuke, the yellow-haired boy, had eventually stammered out, and the yellow-haired one was Zenitsu, who spent the walk to the roadside shrine, alternately shrieking that they were all going to be eaten, and staring at Nezuko with an expression of doomed devotion, wanted to fight the stranger to establish who was stronger. Tanjiro talked him out of it. The rice merchant and his daughter were sent on toward the town with a crow the boy called down out of the dark sky, a ragged black messenger that spoke in a rasping human voice, and made Jack's brow rise a fraction, the only surprise he had permitted himself all night. At the shrine, with a small fire between them, they explained the world. Jack listened the way he did everything, completely and without interruption, and what he learned settled over him like cold water. There were demons, thousands perhaps, scattered across the country, hiding in the villages and the cities and the deep woods. They had all once been human, every one. They were made by a single progenitor, an ancient and cruel thing named Kibutsuji Muzan, who could turn a dying man into a monster with a drop of his blood, and who ranked his creations by how much of that blood they carried. The strongest were called the 12 Kizuki, the 12 demon moons. They had lived for centuries, they ate people, and against them stood the Demon Slayer Corps, an organization the government did not acknowledge exists, children and grown warriors both, who carried swords forged from a special ore and a special sand that drank the sunlight, and who died in enormous numbers to hold the dark back a single night at a time. "The sun," Tanjiro said, poking the fire, "is the only sure way to kill them. Sunlight burns them to ash in moments. That's why they only hunt at night. Our blades, Nichiren blades, can behead them, and if you cut a demon's neck cleanly, it can't regenerate. But an ordinary sword," he looked at the katana lying across Jack's knees, and his ember eyes were troubled. "An ordinary sword does nothing. A demon shrugs off any wound in a heartbeat. What you did on that road, Jack-san, with a blade that isn't Nichiren, I don't understand it. I've never heard of it." "Nor have I heard of a demon who protects her brother," Jack said quietly. The fire popped. Everyone went still. Nezuko, who had been sitting very close to Tanjiro, with her knees drawn up and her huge pink eyes fixed on the flames, shrank a little at the attention. Tanjiro's hand did not go to his sword, but his voice took on a careful edge. "She was human. She was my sister. Muzan attacked our family while I was away, killed our mother, our brothers, our little sister. Nezuko was the only one left alive, and his blood got into her wounds, and he swallowed. She changed, but she never lost herself, not all the way. She's fought her own hunger for 2 years. She has never tasted human blood, not once. She protects people instead of eating them. I'm taking her to someone who might be able to turn her human again, and I will cut down anyone who tries to kill her before I do." He said the last part very evenly, looking straight at the armed stranger across the fire, and Jack understood that this gentle, courteous boy had just promised, without heat, to die fighting him if it came to that. Jack respected it enormously. "May I show you something?" he said, "so that we understand each other?" He rose. Zenitsu made a small, terrified noise. Inosuke came half off the ground, blades scraping. Tanjiro shifted his weight to put himself between Jack and his sister, and Nezuko, reading the tension, pushed up onto her feet too. And for the first time since the trees, a low growl started in her throat, and her eyes flared brighter, and the dark veins under her skin stood out sharp. A demon rousing to defend what was hers. Zenitsu whimpered. Inosuke grinned under the boar's head. Very slowly, watching all of them, Jack drew the katana. That sound again, the clean whisper, and under it, the low forge note, the hum of a made thing. The blade came free and caught the firelight, and it was, at rest, an ordinary and beautiful sword, unmarked steel, with a good honest edge. Nezuko's growl climbed. She had seen swords drawn near her before. She knew what they meant. And Jack turned the blade in his hand, reversed his grip, and held it out across the fire hilt first, offering it to Tanjiro. Then, as the boy stared, Jack stepped forward, past the drawn boar blades, past the growling demon, until he stood an arm's length from Nezuko herself, and he lowered himself to one knee before her, so that his throat was level with her claws, and he laid his own bare hand flat against the flat of the offered blade, so that any strike she made would find him first. "This sword was forged by gods," he said, to the demon girl, quietly, as one speaks to a frightened animal or a frightened child. "It was made from the essence of what is good, and it cuts only what is evil. It cannot harm the innocent. It has never once been able to. If I raised it against you, Nezuko-san." He turned his palm, showing her the edge resting harmless against his own skin. "It would refuse me, as it refuses me now." The growl faltered. Nezuko's slit eyes went from the blade to his face and back. Some old, deep part of her, the part that read a room, that had spent 2 years learning who was a threat and who was not, was working behind those inhuman eyes. She took one clawed step forward. She lifted a small hand toward the flat of the sword, hesitated, and touched it, one fingertip, the way the merchant's daughter had taken one finger of his hand in the wood. The blade lay silent under her touch, no hum, no answer. To a sword forged to destroy evil, there was nothing here to destroy. Something went out of Nezuko all at once. The veins faded, the growl died, the fierce light in her eyes softened back to that startling sunset pink, and she made a small chirping sound through the bamboo gag that Jack had no way of knowing was, for her, a sound of trust. She sat back down. She patted the flat of the blade twice, gently, as if reassuring it, and then looked up at Tanjiro with an expression that even a stranger could read as "he's all right." Tanjiro let out a breath he'd clearly been holding for a full minute. Behind him, Zenitsu had fainted upright. Inosuke was disgusted that no one had fought anyone. "You knelt in front of a demon," Tanjiro said, half in wonder, "and put your own throat under her hand." "I put my throat under a grieving girl who has been treated as a monster by everyone who has met her," Jack said, rising and resheathing the blade, "and trusted a sword that has never once lied to me." He looked down at Nezuko with something gentle in his weathered face. "In my long life, I have cut down more evil than I can number, and I have learned that the world is very fast to name a thing a monster, and very slow to ask what was done to it first. Your sister is not evil. My blade would have told me if she were. It did not. It was the first time in 2 years that anyone outside their small circle had said it plainly, without qualification, without a hand near a weapon." Tanjiro had to look away into the fire for a moment, and when he looked back, his eyes were bright. "Then I think," he said, "that you should come with us." He explained the rest as the fire burned down. They had been summoned, the 4 of them, and a Hashira, one of the 9 pillars of the core, the strongest slayers alive. A demon had been working the railways, the Mugen Train, the great steam engine that ran the mountain lines through the night, had swallowed more than 40 people over a handful of trips. Vanished, no bodies, no trace. Slayers sent to investigate had not come back. Now the Corps was sending the Flame Hashira himself, and Tanjiro's group had been ordered to support him. "A Hashira," Jack repeated. "Kyojiro. Rengoku." Tanjiro said the name with unmistakable awe. "I've never met him. But if the Corps is sending a pillar, then whatever is on that train is bad. Lower Moon, at least, maybe worse." He looked at Jack. "I won't lie to you. If you come, you may not come back. That's what the Corps is. We walk toward the thing everyone else runs from, and a lot of us don't walk home." Jack thought of the merchant weeping simply to be alive. He thought of the child's sandal in the demon's hand, being smelled. He thought of 40 people who had boarded a train in the ordinary way, meaning to reach somewhere ordinary, and never arrived. And he thought, as he had thought on 100 worlds, in 100 ages, always the same thought that had cost him his home and his time, and would not let him rest, that a warrior who can act and does not is a kind of coward, and that he had never yet learned how to be that particular coward, no matter how tired he became. "I do not know how to return to my own land," he said. "I do not know how I arrived here, or whether I will ever leave, but I know the shape of what is on that train, because it is the same shape I have fought my whole life, wearing a different face." He looked toward the valley, toward the distant rails, where that low whistle had sounded and not been repeated. "There are innocents dying in the dark. I have a sword made to end exactly the thing that is killing them. I would be a poor guest in your country if I turned my back on that." Inosuke declared loudly that he would kill the train demon first, and the samurai could have whatever was left. Zenitsu, waking, learned they were going toward the monster, and not away from it, and had a small breakdown. Nezuko had climbed back into her wooden box, a box, Jack now understood, that she carried on her brother's back through the daylight hours, sleeping through the sun that would burn her, a coffin she chose over dying, and pulled the little door shut behind her. They walked down the mountain in the last black hours before dawn. Jack kept to the rear, watching the tree line, his hand resting easy on the silent hilt. Somewhere ahead, past the switchbacks and the sleeping villages, a great iron machine sat cooling in a station yard, and inside it something old and clever was already dreaming of the 4 slayers coming toward it, and of the 5th figure, the one it could not place, the one whose scent belonged to no era it had ever fed upon. Far to the south, in a chamber no map recorded, a man who had worn 1,000 faces paused in the middle of a sentence. He could not have said why. A cold thread of wrongness, so faint he nearly dismissed it, had brushed the edge of the web he had spun across the whole country, a web that felt every demon's death like a plucked string. One of his lesser creatures had died on a mountain road tonight. That was nothing. They died constantly, but it had died wrong. It had died and stayed dead in a way that had nothing to do with the sun, and nothing to do with the Corps' cursed blades, and Muzan Kibutsuji, who had survived 1,000 years by treating every unfamiliar thing as a mortal threat until proven otherwise, filed the wrongness away in the cold ledger of his mind, and resolved, without urgency, to learn what had made it. The sky in the east was not yet gray, but it would be, soon. It always was. That was the one mercy this world reliably offered, and every soul walking down the mountain toward the train was counting the hours until it came. The station yard smelled of coal smoke and iron, and, under it, that sweet rotten note Jack now knew for what it was. Dawn had come and gone by the time they reached the town at the foot of the mountains, and Nezuko rode the daylight out in her box on Tanjiro's back, while the rest of them walked into a world washed pale and ordinary by the sun. Vendors calling, a paper boy, the mundane clatter of a country town going about its morning. It struck Jack, not for the first time, how thin the membrane was. These people bought their rice and complained about the weather, and had no idea that a train they might board tonight had already eaten 40 of their neighbors. In every world he had walked, the innocent lived like this, a hand's breadth from the dark, and blessedly blind to it. He had long ago stopped deciding whether the blindness was a cruelty or a gift. The Mugen Train waited at the platform's end like a sleeping animal. It was a beautiful machine, black and green and brass, steam ghosting from its joints, and Jack disliked it immediately and completely. His body read it the way it had read the demon on the road, that wrongness, that stillness, that should not be, but spread out, diffuse, soaked into the whole length of the thing, rather than crouched in a single shape. The sword at his hip did not hum. It was not close enough yet, or the evil was not concentrated enough yet, but it was aware. He could feel it, the way you feel a hound come alert beside you. They found the flame Hashira in the dining car, and he was eating. Rengoku Kyojiro sat at a table laid with perhaps a dozen bento boxes, working through them with tremendous focus and evident joy, and he was, Jack thought, the single most vivid human being he had encountered in this quiet gray country. His hair flared red to gold like a banked fire. His eyes were bright and slightly too wide, fixed forward with an intensity that never seemed to blink. He wore the corps uniform under a white haori with flame-licked hems, and everything about him, the set of his shoulders, the ferocious cheer of him, radiated a warmth so total it was almost a physical heat. "Umai," he announced, to no one, of the meal. Then he saw them, and rose in one smooth motion, and any impression of a genial simpleton evaporated. The man moved like a landslide, deciding to stand up. "You're the young ones the master sent. Good! Very good!" His gaze swept the four of them, rapid and precise, cataloging. Tanjiro, Zenitsu, whimpering, Inosuke, bristling. The box on Tanjiro's back, which his eyes lingered on with sudden hardness. A Hashira knew the smell of a demon, and there was one riding into a core operation on a boy's shoulders, and Jack watched the flame Hashira make a decision to set that aside for now that cost him visible effort. Then Rengoku's bright eyes reached Jack and stopped. For a long moment the flame Hashira simply looked at him. The cheer did not leave his face, but something underneath it went very still and very old, the way a fire looks calm right before it decides which way to move. Jack held the look. He had been measured by masters on a dozen worlds. He knew the weight of a true fighter's assessment, and he gave the Hashira the courtesy of standing quietly under it. "You," Rengoku said at last, "are not a slayer. No, you're not a demon." A statement tested against whatever sense the man used. But you carry yourself like someone who has killed a great many dangerous things, and lived, which almost no one does. And, his eyes dropped to the katana, then came back up, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine puzzlement crossed that certain face. "There is something about your sword that I do not understand, and I understand swords. Who are you?" "I am called Jack. I am a swordsman, far from my own country, and last night I killed a demon on a mountain road, with a blade that is not one of yours, and it did not regenerate." The dining car went quiet. Even Inosuke stopped fidgeting. "That's not possible," Rengoku said, without heat, simply stating a law of the world. Only sunlight and Nichiren steel end a demon permanently. There are no exceptions. In 300 years of the core, there have been no exceptions. "Tanjiro saw it," Jack said. "I make no claim you must believe. But there is a rice merchant walking home this morning with his daughter, who would be dead otherwise, and there was a demon on that road that is now ash on the wind, and it was neither the sun nor your steel that did it." He paused. "I do not fully understand it myself. The blade was forged, in my homeland, by gods, out of the essence of righteousness. It cuts evil, and cannot harm the good. I did not know, until last night, that your demons would count as evil to it. Now I know." Rengoku considered this the way he did everything, completely, ferociously, and without any apparent difficulty accepting a wild claim on the strength of a boy's honest face and a stranger's steady one. It was, Jack would come to understand, the Hashira's defining quality. He met the world head-on and at full brightness, and he did not flinch from things that would have made a lesser man retreat into doubt. "Show me," Rengoku said, "if the chance comes. Tonight I suspect it will." He clapped his hands together once, decision made, warmth flooding back. "Whatever you are, Jack, you killed a demon and saved 2 innocents, and you have come toward the danger instead of away from it. That is enough for me. If your sword does what you say, then the Corps has never had a weapon like it, and I would very much like to see it work. If it does not," the smile stayed. The eyes went flat and certain. "Then I will handle the demon on this train myself, and you will stay behind me. Agreed?" "Agreed," Jack said, and meant it. He had known this kind of man before, on other worlds. The ones who burned so bright and so honestly that lesser things could not help but be steadied by them. His father had been such a man, before Aku. It cost Jack something to look at Rengoku and feel that old warmth, so far from home, wearing a stranger's face. The train's whistle blew. Doors thudded. Somewhere a conductor called the departure, and the ordinary evening passengers, dozens of them, families and traders, and a pair of young lovers, and an old woman with a cage of songbirds, began to board the beautiful black machine that had already killed 40 of their kind. "How many aboard tonight?" Jack asked quietly, watching them file past the windows. "More than 200, Rengoku said, and for the first time, The cheer thinned to something grave, which is why we cannot simply refuse to let it run, and why we cannot fight recklessly. Whatever is doing this hides among them, and if we move wrong, we lose civilians by the score. He looked at the boarding crowd, and Jack saw the weight of them settle onto the Hashira's shoulders. 200 lives, gladly carried. Our task is not only to kill the demon, it is to bring every one of these people home to the morning. Remember that, all of you. A slayer who wins the fight and loses the passengers has lost. They boarded. The Mugen Train pulled out of the station in a long shudder of steam and steel, and the town's lights slid away behind, and then the mountains closed in dark on either side, and the windows filled with nothing but black glass and the reflection of the dining car's lamps. Jack sat with his back to a wall and his sword across his knees, and watched the demon sense in his body climb, slow and steady, as though the train were carrying them deeper into the thing rather than across it. The wrongness thickened with every mile. The blade at his hip had begun, at the very lowest edge of hearing, to hum. It was full dark now, and there was no sun in the whole length of the night to save anyone, and 200 souls were rolling through the mountains inside the belly of a beast that was already, very gently, beginning to sing them to sleep. Up in the engine, where no passenger ever went, a young man with pale skin and a coat of dark feathers pressed his ear to the iron and listened to the heartbeat of the train that was, by now, more him than machine. Enmu, lower rank 1, the last of the lower moons Muzan had not yet found reason to destroy, smiled and closed his eyes and reached out through the dreaming dark toward the warm sleeping bodies packed into his cars. He had done this many times. He knew exactly how it went. Show them the dream they most wanted, hold them under so deep they would never claw back to waking, and then, at leisure, unmake them from within. But tonight, as his dream washed down the length of the train and took hold of 200 minds, the passengers, the crew, and yes, even the 4 young slayers and the terrible bright Hashira, all of them slipping under despite themselves, one mind, near the back, did not go down like the others. It went under, but it did not go quiet. And in the place where Enmu's dream should have shown a sleeping swordsman a gentle lie, the demon found instead a road stretching back further than any dream he had ever spun, and a longing so vast and so old and so disciplined that it made his ancient, dreaming heart falter. The longing of a man who wanted one thing, and only one thing, and had wanted it for what felt like 1,000 years. Home, the dream whispered to Enmu, reading its sleeper. He wants to go home. The demon smiled, and reached to give the samurai exactly that. He woke on the road home, and knew at once that it was a lie, and it broke his heart anyway. The land was right. That was the cruelty of it. The dream did not offer him something foreign and false. It offered him the exact thing, rendered perfectly, down to the smell of the rice paddies flooded silver in the afternoon, and the particular blue the far mountains went at that hour, and the sound of cicadas he had not heard in a lifetime of exile. He was walking a road he had walked as a boy, in the country of his birth, in the age of his birth, before Aku, and ahead of him, the road curved toward a gate he knew, and past the gate rose the walls of his father's palace, whole and unburned, banners moving in a wind that smelled of home. And on the road ahead, small with distance, a figure was walking toward him, tall, upright, a man in the robes of an emperor, with a bearing Jack would have known across any distance, in any age, through any lie, his father. Jack stopped walking. His hand came to rest on the hilt at his hip, and the sword was silent. For there was nothing evil here, nothing to cut, only a mercy so exquisite and so total that it was, he understood, the deadliest thing that had ever been set before him. He had faced Aku's fire and Aku's minions, and the long grinding despair of a future without hope, and none of it had ever come close to the danger of this quiet road, and the man walking down it with his arms beginning to open. "Father," the dream said, in his father's voice, and it was his father's voice exactly, warm and grave and glad. "You have come home. You have been so long away. Come. It is over now. Set down the sword. Rest." Every part of Jack that was a son wanted to run to him. He did not move, because he had learned, in 100 years of wandering, the shape of the thing that wants you to stop. It always wore a kind face. It always spoke of rest. Aku had offered it in the mouths of 100 servants. Stay here, samurai. This future is not so bad. Forget the past. Forget your father. Be at peace. And Jack had walked past every one of them, because a peace bought by surrender is not peace. It is only a beautiful death. He had wanted to go home for so long that the wanting had become the truest thing about him, and it was precisely because he wanted it so completely that he knew, standing on that perfect road, that no true thing had ever been given to him so easily. Home was not a gift a stranger handed you at the roadside. Home was the thing you bled toward. It did not come to you. "You are not my father," Jack said, softly, to the figure with his father's face, and it cost him more to say than any blow he had ever taken. The dream flickered. The father figure's smile did not falter, but the light behind the eyes went briefly wrong, and Jack understood he had touched the seam of the thing. He drew the sword. It would not cut the dream. There was no evil in the illusion itself, only in the hand that had made it, and that hand was not here on this road. But Jack had not drawn it to cut. He had drawn it to remember. He reversed the blade and turned the point inward and looked one last time at the road and the gate and the man he would have given his life to reach. And then he understood, with the cold clarity that had kept him alive across 100 worlds, what he had to do to wake. Somewhere his real body sat sleeping in a train car full of the doomed. To wake from a dream this deep, he had been told long ago by a monk on a mountain far from here, one must be willing to sever the thing the dream holds you by. And this dream held him by the deepest wound he had. "Forgive me," Jack said, to his father, to the home he could not have, to the boy he had been who still believed the road curved toward something. And he did the hardest thing he had ever done, which was to choose the cold train and the 200 strangers, and the demon war of a world not his own, over the warm and perfect lie of everything he had ever wanted. To cut, in himself, the cord of longing the demon had wrapped around his heart and hauled him under by. The road shattered like ice. He came awake in the dining car with a gasp that was almost a sob, upright, the sword already in his hand, his face wet. For one disoriented instant the wrongness of it all crashed over him. The black windows, the swaying lamps, the 4 young slayers slumped in their seats with terrible peaceful smiles, Rengoku himself sagging bright and dreaming against the wall, all of them gone soft and gone down, every one of them drowning in whatever perfect lie had been made to fit the shape of their hearts. And the whole train, he realized, had changed while he slept. The demon sense in his body was screaming now. The walls of the car had begun, very subtly, to breathe, the wood grain flexing like skin, veins standing out along the luggage racks, the floor gone warm and faintly wet underfoot. Enmu had waited until every soul aboard was under, and now the lower moon was doing what he had done 40 times before, fusing himself into the machine, making the train and the demon one flesh, so that 200 sleeping bodies were no longer passengers on a train, but food inside a stomach. Jack rose. Around him the others slept on, and he knew with grim certainty that they would not wake on their own. The dream had been built to hold them, and they had not learned, as he had over a bitter century, the terrible discipline of cutting the thing you love most to save yourself. He went to Rengoku first, because a Hashira sleeping was 200 lives lost, and he did not know how to wake a man from a dream. His own waking had been a wound, and he could not open another man's wound for him. He gripped the flame Hashira's shoulder and spoke his name, and got nothing. The bright face smiled on. Whatever Rengoku dreamed, it was gentle, and it had him utterly. The floor beneath Jack's feet split open with a wet tearing sound, and a mouth full of the train's own timber teeth rose out of it, and a voice that was 200 sleepers speaking at once whispered, delighted and appalled, from every wall of the swaying car. "You woke. You broke my dream. No one breaks my dream. What are you?" Jack turned toward the voice, and settled his weight, and raised the god-forged blade so that the swinging lamplight ran down its edge. And for the first time since he had come through the black portal into this quiet, haunted country, the sword at his hand did not merely hum. It sang, a high, clear, ringing note, the sound of a thing forged to destroy evil finally standing in the presence of enough of it to answer with its whole voice. The breathing walls flinched from the sound. The floor mouth recoiled. "I am a swordsman," Jack said, into the belly of the beast that had eaten 40 innocents and meant to eat 200 more. And my blade knows what you are, even when you wear the faces of everyone else's dreams. You have made a stomach of a train full of sleeping people. You will not digest a single one of them. He stepped forward into the wet, breathing dark, alone and awake, in a monster full of dreamers, and went to find the demon's true neck. Enmu had lived a long time, and in all of it he had never been afraid. Fear was for prey. He was the lower rank one, the last of the lower moons, and where his siblings had been culled by an impatient master, he had survived by being useful, by being the demon, who could do the one thing even the strongest could not, which was to walk into a mind and take it apart from the inside, where no blade could reach. 200 sleepers rode inside him now. He could feel each of them, warm and slack and dreaming, their souls laid open like books he was leisurely tearing pages from. 40 times he had done this. It had never once gone wrong. And now there was a man walking through his body with a sword that sang, and Enmu, for the first time in more years than he could count, felt the cold animal thing at the root of him that he had thought long dead. He had seen the samurai's dream. He had built it himself, reached into the sleeping stranger and found the deepest wound and pressed the perfect balm into it. A father, a home, an ending to a longing so old it had worn grooves in the man's soul. No one refused that. Enmu's whole art rested on the certainty that no one, given the exact thing they wanted most, would ever choose to wake. He had watched grieving mothers cradle dream children and hardened killers weep in dream arms and desperate men walk laughing into dream fortunes, and not one of them had ever chosen the cold true dark over the warm false light. This one had drawn a sword in his own dream, and cut the balm out of his own wound, and walked back into the nightmare on purpose. And Enmu did not understand it, and what he did not understand he feared. "You could have stayed," the demon whispered, from everywhere, as the samurai advanced up the swaying, breathing corridor. Enmu had retreated his true body, the pale young man, the coat of feathers, deep into the fused flesh of the engine, where the neck that mattered was buried under tons of living timber and iron, and the sleeping bodies he had grown into the walls. "I gave you your father, your home, the one thing your whole ugly life is bent toward. I felt how badly you wanted it, and you cut it away like it was nothing. What kind of creature does that?" "A tired one," Jack said, and did not slow. The train fought him. Enmu made it fight. The floor heaved, timber teeth erupted from the walls, tendrils of grown bone lashed out of the luggage racks, and threaded all through it. The sleeping passengers, their bodies half absorbed into the corridor, their faces surfacing from the wet wood with those terrible peaceful smiles. That was the demon's cruelest defense, and he knew it. To fight through the train, the samurai would have to cut through the very people he had woken to save. 40 times, no slayer had been able to. They faltered at the first innocent face in the wall, and in their faltering, Enmu took them. Jack did not falter, and it was worse for Enmu than if he had. The samurai cut, and the god-forged blade passed through the timber teeth and the grown bone and the lashing tendrils, and where it met the flesh of a sleeping passenger fused into the wall, it stopped. It simply stopped, the edge resting against a dreaming woman's cheek without parting the skin, because the blade could not harm the innocent, and would not be made to, not by the demon's cunning, not by the samurai's own hand. Jack turned his cuts around them. He flowed up the corridor, slicing the demon's flesh to ribbons and leaving every human face untouched, a discipline so total and so precise that Enmu, watching through 100 half-formed eyes, felt the cold thing at his root climb into his throat. "That's not possible," the demon breathed, and now the layered voices of 200 sleepers carried an edge of genuine panic. "You can't tell them apart at that speed. No one can. You'd have to know, at every stroke, exactly what is me and what is them." "I do not have to know," Jack said, cutting, always moving, ash and splinters trailing behind him. "The sword knows. It has always known. That is the whole of what it is." And this was the thing that undid Enmu, the thing that turned his ancient confidence to water. The sword drew the line he could not blur. His entire art was the smearing of the line between the dreamer and the dream, the fusing of victim and monster, until no one could strike one without striking the other. He hid inside innocence. He had always hidden inside innocence. And here came a blade that saw straight through the fusion to the single clean truth underneath. This part is evil, this part is not, and cut exactly, and only the first, and no camouflage of borrowed flesh could confuse it for a heartbeat. Enmu pulled his true neck deeper into the engine and screamed the train awake into full monstrousness. There was no more hiding now. The Mugen Train stopped being a train. The engine reared up off the rails in a shriek of tearing iron, the cars behind it folding and knotting into a single vast, segmented thing, a caterpillar of steel and living bone 100 meters long, and the whole mountain valley filled with the sound of a machine becoming a beast. 200 sleepers were sealed deep in its flesh, and near the front, in the churning heart of the transformation, the 4 young slayers and the flame Hashira were being drawn down into the dark, to be smothered and dissolved while they dreamed their gentle dreams. Jack braced against the heaving floor and understood 2 things at once, cold and clear. The first was that he could not save them all alone. He could reach Enmu's neck perhaps and end him, but a demon this fused into 200 bodies would not simply die clean. The collapse alone might kill the sleepers he was tangled through, and there were 5 people up front already drowning, who would be gone long before Jack fought his way to the neck through the whole length of the beast. The second was that the bright man, the Hashira, was the only other one aboard who could turn the tide, and the Hashira was asleep, and Jack did not know how to wake a stranger from a dream without opening a wound he had no right to open. So he did the only thing left. He fought his way back down the bucking corridor toward the front, toward the 5 sleepers, cutting the beast's flesh and sparing its stolen faces at every stroke, and when he reached Rengoku, he knelt beside the dreaming Hashira in the wet, breathing dark, and did something he had not done for anyone in 100 years of solitary wandering. He gripped the man's shoulder, and he did not shout, and he did not shake him. He spoke, low and steady and certain, the way his own masters had spoken to him when he was a boy learning to hold his mind against fear, the way a father speaks a son awake. Kyojuro, the name he had heard only once. There are 200 people in the walls of this beast, and they are dying, and they are counting on you to bring them to the morning. You told me a slayer who wins the fight and loses the passengers has lost. They have not been lost yet, but they will be, unless you wake. Wake up. The morning needs you to carry it to them. Whether it was the words, or the name, or some deep unbreakable core in the flame Hashira that no dream could hold for long once his duty was named aloud, Rengoku's 2 wide eyes snapped open, clear and burning, and utterly present, with none of the fog of a man surfacing slowly. He came awake the way fire catches, all at once, and complete. He took in the breathing walls, the fused sleepers, the beast the train had become, the samurai kneeling over him with a singing blade, and he was on his feet before Jack had finished rising, Haori flaring, and the heat came off him in a wave that dried the wet timber and pushed back the dark. 200, Rengoku said. It was not a question. His voice filled the whole quaking car. Then we have work to do, swordsman, and no time to waste on being amazed at you. A grin, ferocious and glad, in the mouth of a monster. You take the neck, I will take the passengers. Between your sword and my fire, not one of these people dies tonight. Agreed? Agreed, Jack said, and for the first time since the portal, something in his chest that had been clenched for 100 years, unclenched a little, the plain relief of not fighting alone. Deep in the churning engine, Enmu felt the Hashira wake, and felt the samurai's blade still singing, and the last of the demon's ancient certainty curdled into something he had truly never felt before. He had eaten 40. He had meant to eat 200, and for the first time in his long life, the lower rank one understood, with the whole cold animal root of him, that he was the one being hunted. Fire and steel went to war inside the belly of the beast, and the beast learned what it was to be afraid. Rengoku moved through the fused train like the thing he was named for. Where Jack's blade was surgical, the flame Hashira's was total. Flame-breathing bloomed down the corridors in great rolling waves of heat that did not burn the sleepers, but seared the demon flesh growing around them, cauterizing the tendrils that reached for their throats, driving the beast to recoil its living walls back from the bodies it had swallowed. He did not simply fight, he shepherded. Every stroke was placed to peel a passenger loose from the flesh that held them, to open a pocket of clean air around a dreaming child, to buy one more soul, one more minute. He was everywhere at once, roaring encouragement to people who could not hear him. And the sheer blazing fact of him steadied the whole nightmare the way a bonfire steadies a dark camp. And it woke the others. Tanjiro surfaced first. Jack learned later that the boy had had to cut his own throat in his dream to escape it. The same terrible price, a child forcing himself awake through self-slaughter. And then the boy was up and moving, calling out that the passengers were fused into the walls, organizing Zenitsu and Inosuke the moment they clawed free of their own dreams. Nezuko burst from her box, and where a demon might have joined the feeding beast, she instead flung herself at the fused sleepers and used her own body to shield them, and her strange kind blood demon art bloomed, pink flame that burned demon flesh and left human skin untouched, a smaller echo of Jack's own blade, and the samurai marked it and understood that this world had its own answers, that the boy had not lied, that mercy itself could be made into a weapon here. But all of it was holding, not winning. The neck was the winning. Enmu had buried his true body deep in the fused engine, and someone had to reach it. "Go!" Rengoku bellowed, catching Jack's eye across the churning car, fire wreathing his arms. "The neck is yours, swordsman. We hold the passengers. Cut the head from this thing." Jack went. He drove forward through the length of the beast, and it was the hardest passage of movement he had made in years, the corridors bucking, the timber teeth erupting, the grown bone lashing, and everywhere the sleeping faces surfacing from the walls that he had to spare at speed. The blade sang the whole way, a high, clear line of sound over the beast's roar, and it drew the line for him at every stroke. This is the demon. This is the innocent. Cut here, spare there. He flowed through it. 100 years of discipline poured into a single unbroken advance, cutting only evil, sparing only good, closing the distance to the buried neck. Enmu felt him coming and threw everything into the walls between them, and threw, too, his voice, because the voice was the last weapon he had. "Why?" the 200-throated whisper pleaded, and there was something almost real in it now, some cracked honest thing surfacing under the demon's panic. "Why do you fight for them? They are nothing to you. This is not your world. These are not your people. You could have kept the dream. You could have gone home, and instead you crawl through my flesh, bleeding for strangers, who will forget your name by morning. What is the sense of you?" And Jack, cutting, answered, not to win, but because the demon had asked the one question that deserved a true answer. "When I was young," he said, "a great evil burned my home and cast me out of my own time. I have wandered 100 years and 100 lands trying to find my way back, and in all that wandering I learned one thing that is true in every land and every age, that the strong are given their strength to stand between the weak and the dark, not for reward, not for home, not because the weak are ours, a cut, a spared face, another meter closer to the neck, because it is the only thing that makes the strength worth having. You were given power, demon, and you used it to make a stomach of a train full of dreamers. I was given a blade, and I will use it to empty you out. That is the whole difference between us. It is the only difference that has ever mattered. You'll die here," Enmu whispered, but it wavered. "Perhaps. I have been dying for 100 years. It has not stopped me yet." He reached the neck. It was buried in the churning heart of the engine, the pale young man's true body, grown vast and knotted into the machine. Feathers and flesh and iron fused into one throbbing mass, the last of the lower moons hidden where 40 slayers before him had never managed to reach. Enmu's true face surfaced from the mass, no longer smiling. The round, childish features stretched with a terror the demon had spent centuries never feeling. He was Muzan's creature. He had thought that made him safe. He had thought the dream made him untouchable. And here at the end was a stranger from no world he knew, a sword that saw straight through every lie he had ever told, and no dream left to hide inside. "You're not even real," Enmu breathed, the last denial of a thing that could not accept its own death. "You can't be. Nothing cuts a demon but the sun and their cursed steel. Nothing. You're a dream. I'm still dreaming. This is—" "No," Jack said, gently, and raised the singing blade. "You are awake. For the first time in a long while, demon. You are truly awake. I am sorry it is only for this." He cut. The god-forged edge passed through Enmu's true neck, the way it had passed through the demon on the mountain road. No resistance, no bone, a total and final absence. And where the sun would have needed to rise, and Nichiren would have needed its slow, certain work, this cut simply ended him, clean and immediate and irreversible. The head came free, and this time there was no regeneration to race against, no dawn to wait for. The wound did not close because the blade had decided, in the instant of the stroke, that this evil should no longer exist, and the world obeyed. Enmu had time for one thing, not a scream. His round face, tumbling free of the collapsing mass, wore an expression Jack had seen before on the mountain road. That small, almost human O, and under the panic and the ancient malice, there surfaced, for a single instant, something that might once, long ago, have been a frightened person, before Muzan's blood had made him into this. Then the ash took him, black smoke guttering off a snuffed wick, and the lower rank one was gone. The beast died. The fused train convulsed, its knotted length shuddering as the demon that had animated it unraveled. And for one terrible moment, Jack feared the collapse would kill the 200 still buried in its flesh. But Rengoku had known this was coming, had been positioning for it the whole time. And as the beast came apart, the flame Hashira and the young slayers were already there, cutting the sleepers free. Nezuko's pink flame searing the last demon tendrils from human skin, all of them working with frantic care to peel 200 people out of the dissolving flesh, before it took them down with it. Not one was lost. The great segmented horror sagged back into being merely a wrecked train scattered along a mountain valley, and inside its broken cars, one by one, the sleepers began to stir and wake, blinking, whole, alive, with no memory of the dream that had nearly digested them. Jack stood in the wreckage under the stars, no dawn yet, the sky still black and crowded, and lowered the blade, and it stopped singing, and the silence after was enormous. He had done it. 40 dead avenged, 200 saved. A demon that had haunted these rails for weeks, turned to ash by a blade from another world. Around him, the slayers were laughing, exhausted, disbelieving, and Rengoku was striding toward him with that ferocious glad grin and both arms open to clap him on the shoulders, roaring something about the greatest swordsmanship he had ever witnessed. And far to the south, in the chamber no map recorded, Muzan Kibutsuji went very still. He had felt the string of his web pluck and go slack. Enmu, dead. That alone was nothing. Lower moons were expendable, and he had been half-minded to cull the creature anyway. But Enmu had not died to the sun, and Enmu had not died to Nichiren steel, and Muzan, who felt every demon's death across the whole country, and knew the texture of each kind of ending, felt this one, and could not name it. Not sunlight, not the cursed blades, something else. Something that ended a demon clean, the way only he himself, or the rising sun, had ever been able to. Something that could, in principle, end him. The progenitor of all demons, who had survived 1,000 years by murdering every uncertainty before it could grow, sat in his hidden dark and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, the faint cold touch of a thing he had thought forever beyond his reach. Fear. He turned his ancient mind to it the way a spider turns toward a tremor at the edge of the web. What blade, what hand, what manner of thing has come into my country that can do what only the sun can do? He would learn, he always learned, and then he would do what he had always done to anything that could threaten him. He would send his very best to erase it. Far above, in a valley slowly graying toward a dawn that was still an hour off, a tired swordsman let a bright stranger embrace him, and did not yet know that the most powerful being in this world had just marked him for death. The dawn was an hour off, and an hour was time enough for a star to fall. The survivors were being gathered, the railway staff who had somehow lived, the 200 passengers stumbling out onto the gravel in dazed clusters, mothers counting children, an old woman searching frantically until someone pressed her cage of songbirds back into her hands. Tanjiro moved among them, gentle and tireless, and Nezuko had retreated to the shadow of an overturned car, and Zenitsu was weeping with relief, and Inosuke was loudly narrating his own heroism to people too shocked to listen. Rengoku stood at the center of it all like a banked fire, warm and certain, directing the rescue with the same total attention he had given his dozen bento boxes a lifetime ago. And Jack stood a little apart, as he always did, watching the tree line, because 100 years had taught him that the dark is never so dangerous as in the moment you believe you have beaten it. That was why he felt it first. It came out of the black valley to the west, not the diffuse wrongness of the train, but a single concentrated point of it, moving fast, moving toward them, and the sword at his hip, which had gone quiet after Enmu, woke again all at once, and began to hum a low warning note. Jack turned toward it. His whole body changed, the way it did before violence, the tiredness sloughing off him like a shed coat. "Kyojiro," he said, and the flame Hashira heard the change in his voice and was moving before the name was finished. The thing landed among them in a crater of displaced gravel, and the survivors screamed and scattered, and it rose up out of the dust unhurried, and Jack looked at it and knew that Enmu had been a child's fear compared to this. It wore the shape of a man, lean, corded with muscle, bare to the waist, skin marked all over with jagged blue lines like cracks in ice or veins of ore. Its hair was pink, tied back rough. Its eyes were the flat, predatory gold of the demon kind. But there was a mind behind them, sharp and awake and terribly interested. And where Enmu had radiated cunning, this thing radiated something purer and older. The pure, joyful hunger of a fighter for a fight. Numbers were carved into its eyes, into the very irises, a character, and above it, 3. "Upper Moon 3, Rengoku said, and for the first time all night, the cheer left the flame Hashira's voice entirely, replaced by a grave, blazing focus. He stepped forward, putting himself between the demon and the survivors, and his hand settled on his sword, Akaza. The demon's gold eyes moved across the scattered slayers with frank disinterest, the children, the weeping boy, the boar, and stopped on Rengoku, and brightened, the way a starving man's eyes brighten at a laid table. A Hashira. Akaza's voice was light, almost warm, threaded through with an eagerness that was somehow more chilling than any snarl. "Flame, from the smell of you. Good, good." He rolled his shoulders, and the blue lines across his body flared brighter. "It's rare I find one worth the trouble. You're strong. I can smell it. The years of training in you, the discipline, the way you've honed yourself. You're beautiful." He said it without irony, a connoisseur admiring a blade. "Become a demon, Flame Hashira. You're too strong to waste on death. Throw off the weakness of being human, and you and I can be strong forever." "I will decline," Rengoku said, "as I will always decline. There is no weakness in being human, demon, growing old, growing weak and dying, carrying the ones who come after on the strength you spent your whole life building. That is the whole worth of it. You have thrown that away, and it has made you strong and empty. I pity you." His golden eyes blazed. "But I will not become you, and I will not let you touch these people, not one of them." Akaza's face did something complicated, a flicker of what might almost have been sorrow, the ancient frustration of a being who genuinely could not understand why the strong ones always chose to die. "Then I'll have to break you," he said, almost gently, "and it grieves me. It always grieves me." And then his gold eyes slid past Rengoku and found Jack and stopped. Everything about the demon changed. He went still, utterly, unnaturally still, and his nostrils flared, and his head tilted, and the frank predatory interest on his face sharpened into something almost like disbelief. He was reading Jack the way Tanjiro had, the way the demons did, tasting the scent of him on the air, and what he found there did not fit anything in a century of hunting. "You," Akaza breathed. "What are you?" He took a step, past Rengoku, toward the samurai, and the flame Hashira tensed but did not strike, reading, as Jack was, that the demon's whole attention had shifted. "You don't smell like a slayer. You don't smell like a demon. You smell like nothing, like nowhere, like no time I've ever." His gold eyes dropped to the katana at Jack's hip, and the blue cracks across his body pulsed. "That sword, that's what killed Lower One tonight. Not the sun, not their cursed steel. That." Something kindled in the demon's face that was almost reverence, almost terror, and was mostly, overwhelmingly, want. "A blade that ends a demon clean. In 1,000 years I've never. Muzan-sama sent me for a weapon, a threat, some new core trick. He didn't tell me it came with a swordsman who feels like that." Jack had not moved. He stood easy, the singing blade quiet in its sheath, reading the demon back. The perfect economy of the thing's stance, the centuries of martial mastery written into every line of it, the sheer honed lethality that made the mountain demon and even Enmu look like fumbling amateurs. This, he understood, was a warrior, a true one, buried under 1,000 years of monstrousness. But a warrior, in the deepest fiber of it, and Jack had spent his life among warriors, and knew the shape of one when it stood before him. "I am called Jack," the samurai said, "and I do not think you were sent for me at all. I think you were sent for a weapon, and you have found instead something you did not expect, and now you do not know whether to fight me or to covet me." A pause. "You are a fighter. I can see it in how you stand. So I will tell you plainly, warrior to warrior, I have no quarrel with the man you were before something made you into this. But I will not let you touch these people, and if you reach for them, my blade knows exactly what you are, and it will not miss." Akaza laughed. A real laugh. Delighted. Almost joyful. The laugh of a starving man who has found not one feast but two, a Hashira and a swordsman like you, in one night. The blue cracks blazed across his whole body now, and he sank into a stance that was pure honed murder, weight low, fists raised, a martial artist's guard perfected over 1,000 years of killing. "Muzan-sama wants your blade understood, samurai. He wants to know what can cut him. But before I take it back to him," his gold eyes glittered, and behind them, unmistakably, was the pure, clean hunger of a fighter who has waited a very long time for an opponent worthy of him. "I want to feel it. Both of you. Come, show me what a flame Hashira and a thing from nowhere can do against Upper Moon 3. The eastern sky was still black. Dawn was an hour off, and Jack drew the blade and it sang, and Rengoku's fire kindled beside him, and the three of them stood in the wreck of the train under a demon-dark sky, two warriors of two different worlds, and the thing that Muzan had sent to erase them both. They fought in the wreck of the train under a black sky, and it was the most beautiful and terrible thing Jack had seen in 100 years. Akaza came at them like weather. His blood demon art was called Destructive Death, a martial style made monstrous, each strike releasing a shockwave of compression marks that unfolded from his fists like blue snowflakes, each snowflake a blow that could shatter stone. He moved faster than the eye could hold, and he read his opponents as he fought, adapting stroke by stroke, 1,000 years of accumulated technique brought to bear the instant he understood a foe. Against a lesser slayer, it would have been over in a breath. It was not over in a breath, because he was fighting a flame Hashira and a man who had trained under the masters of 100 worlds, and the two of them, without a word, fell into rhythm, as though they had fought side by side for years. Rengoku was fire made discipline. Flame-breathing bloomed around him in great rolling arcs, each form a wall of heat and a scything blade at once, and he pressed Akaza relentlessly, refusing to let the demon flow toward the huddled survivors. His whole art bent as much on shielding as on striking. And Jack was the thing Akaza could not solve. The demon's centuries of adaptation had nothing filed against a man who fought like no slayer, whose blade obeyed rules Akaza had never encountered. For every time the demon took a wound and reached, by reflex, to regenerate it, the wounds the god-forged blade left did not close. Nichiren required a clean beheading. This blade required only to touch him, and Akaza, who had healed from 10,000 injuries across 1,000 years, felt the samurai's cuts stay open and bleed ash, and understood with a fighter's cold clarity that against this one weapon, his single greatest advantage, his deathlessness, simply did not exist. It should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with joy. "Yes!" Akaza roared, delighted, blood and ash streaming from wounds that would not knit, throwing himself harder into the fight, rather than away from it. This, 1,000 years and finally something that can end me, finally a reason to fight with everything. He was laughing as he bled, and there was something under the laughter that made Jack's chest ache, because he had heard that note before, in warriors who had lived too long, and lost too much, and could no longer feel alive except at the edge of death. And then the blade told Jack something. He had swung at Akaza a dozen times now, and every time the sword had sung its clear high note of evil, cut here. But this time, mid-stroke, as the edge passed close to the demon's chest, The note wavered. For a single instant, over the flat gold hunger and the 1,000 years of murder, the blade forged to see the truth of a thing caught something else buried far down under the monster, something small and human and unbearably sad, and the sword's certainty flickered, the way it had flickered before Nezuko, the way a thing forged to cut only evil flickers when it brushes against a scrap of buried good. Jack pulled the stroke. He did not mean to. His body, trusting the blade, simply followed it, and the killing cut became a shallow one, and Akaza, who had braced for a death blow that did not come, staggered back in genuine confusion. "Why?" the demon demanded, chest heaving, ash guttering from a dozen open wounds. "You had me. That would have finished it. Why did you stop?" "Because my blade did," Jack said, and lowered it a fraction, and looked at the thing before him with new eyes. "It cuts only evil. It has never once hesitated in 100 years. And it hesitated just now, at your heart, which means there is something in you that is not evil, demon, something it will not cut, buried very deep and very long. But there," he searched the flat gold eyes. "Who were you, before?" And something happened in Akaza's face that 1,000 years of core records had never recorded. The upper moon faltered. "I don't," the demon's voice cracked. His hand went to his own chest, to the place the blade had refused. "I don't remember. I never remember. Muzan-sama's blood takes it. The past, all of it. I've never been able to." But his gold eyes had gone wide and wet and lost, and his stance had come undone. And for the first time the honed murder in him wavered into a bewildered, ancient grief that had no name it could reach. Somewhere down under the monster, a name he could not recall was struggling to surface. Hakuji, though he did not know it. A boy, a father he had failed, a woman he had loved, a sensei, a poisoned well, a rage that had made him into this. And the blade had found it, and touched it, and would not cut it. And the demon did not understand why the touch of a killing sword had cracked him open like this. Rengoku, blazing, had gone still beside Jack, reading, as Jack read, that something extraordinary was happening. "Listen to me," Jack said, urgently, into the crack he had opened, because 100 years had taught him that these moments do not last. "The thing that made you into this, took your past to keep you. It made you strong by hollowing you out. But the man you were is still down there. My blade proves it. It will not cut him. He is still there. And you do not have to keep being the weapon that thing forged. You are more than what Muzan made you. Every demon I have met in this world was human first. Yours is only buried deeper." For one impossible moment, it hung in the balance. The upper moon stood swaying in the wreckage, blood and ash pouring from him. One hand pressed to a chest the blade would not open, his gold eyes lost and wet, and reaching for something 1,000 years had buried. A warrior, a fighter, a joyful, hungry killer, and under all of it, a broken boy who had loved and lost and been remade into a monster, to spare himself the grief of it. Jack held out his empty hand. Rengoku held his fire. The whole night held its breath. And then Akaza screamed. It was not rage. It was the sound of a thing recoiling from its own buried grief. The sound of a man who had made himself into a monster, precisely so that he would never have to feel this, and could not bear to feel it now. The blue cracks flared across his whole body, blinding, and he wrenched himself back from the edge Jack had led him to. "No, no, I won't. I won't remember. I won't." And the grief slammed shut behind 1,000 years of practiced murder, and the upper moon came apart from the man again and threw himself back into the fight with a desperation that was worse than any fury. But he was cracked now. Jack had seen it. Rengoku had seen it. And a demon fighting to outrun his own heart fights worse than a demon fighting to kill. "He's breaking," Rengoku called, fire wreathing him, driving forward. "Whatever you did, swordsman, his rhythm is gone. Press him." And in the east, along the black rim of the mountains, so faint that only the demon felt it, the sky began, barely, at the very edge of possibility, to think about turning gray. Akaza felt the coming sun, the way all his kind did, in the marrow, a cold clock ticking toward annihilation. He felt the samurai's blade that would not let him regenerate. He felt the flame Hashira's fire on one side, and the god-forged edge on the other, And worst of all, he felt the crack the blade had opened in his own chest, the buried grief clawing to surface, the name he could not remember beating at the inside of his ribs. 1,000 years of certainty were coming apart all at once, and dawn was coming, and the samurai was still holding out his empty hand. The upper moon had to choose, and the whole war, though none of them yet knew it, bent around what he chose next. Akaza chose the only thing a coward of the heart can choose, which is to run from himself. And in running, he showed Jack the truth of what the blade could and could not do. He broke off the fight, not because he was losing it, though he was, bleeding from a dozen wounds that would not close, hemmed between fire and the God-forged edge, but because the thing clawing at the inside of his chest was worse than any blade, and the only way to silence it was to get away from the man who had opened it. He hurled himself backward in a burst of blue light, put 50 meters of wrecked gravel between himself and the samurai, and stood there heaving, ash pouring off him, gold eyes wild. "You'll take it back," he snarled. At the fight, at the blade, at the crack in his own chest, Jack could not tell which. "Whatever you did, I won't. Muzan-sama sent me for your sword, samurai, and I'll bring him your sword. I'll bring him your head, and then I won't have to." His voice fractured. He pressed a fist to the place the blade had refused. "I won't have to feel this. I won't have to remember. He takes it away. That's the mercy of him, don't you see? He takes it all away." And Jack understood then the full horror of what Muzan had made. Not a monster who had lost his humanity, but a man who had been offered the erasure of his own unbearable grief, and had taken it, again and again, choosing the hollow strength of the demon over the agony of remembering what he had lost. That was the trap. That was how the darkness held its own. It did not simply take the past. It made forgetting feel like kindness. The sky in the east was graying now, truly graying. Akaza felt it and flinched, and Jack saw the demon's whole calculation shift. He could not finish this before the sun, and the sun would finish him. What happened next happened very fast. Akaza, cornered between the rising light and the two warriors, made the choice his master had trained into him across 1,000 years. When you cannot win, take something and flee. He could not take the samurai. The blade saw to that. No demon could close on it and live. But the flame Hashira had spent himself shielding 200 people, had fought a lower moon's beast and then an upper moon without pause. And for one splinter of a second, as he turned to track the demon's break, Rengoku was a half-beat slow. Akaza saw it, the fighter's instinct, the 1,000 years of murder, and drove at the Hashira with everything he had left. A killing strike aimed to punch through the heart and be gone before the sun crested. Jack had 100 years of reading exactly this moment. He was already moving before Akaza committed, not toward the demon, but toward Rengoku, throwing himself into the line of the strike. The God-forged blade came up, and here was the thing the whole night had been building toward, the truth of what the sword was. Akaza's killing fist, packed with 1,000 years of murderous intent, was evil in the instant it was thrown, and the blade knew it, and sang, and met the strike not as steel meets flesh, but as righteousness meets the will to kill. The compression marks shattered against the edge and unmade, and Jack, flowing through the parry the way water flows around stone, turned the block into a single upward cut that passed through Akaza's extended arm and stayed open, ash geysering from a wound that could not close, and the demon's killing blow died 1/2 meter from Rengoku's heart. Akaza reeled back, arm streaming ash, and the east went from gray to pale gold. "No!" The demon threw up his remaining hand against a horizon that was beginning to burn. He had lingered too long. The crack Jack had opened, the fight, the killing strike, the grief he could not outrun, all of it had cost him the minutes he needed. And now the sun was coming, the one thing in this world that even an upper moon could not survive. And Jack lowered the blade and did not press. He could have. The demon was cornered, wounded, one arm gone to ash, the sun rising to finish what the samurai's sword had started. A clean cut would have ended Upper Moon 3 then and there. A blow no other weapon in this world could have landed. The death of one of Muzan's 12. Rengoku braced for it. Tanjiro, watching from the survivors, braced for it. It was the strategic act, the merciful to the world act, the end of a monster who had killed thousands. But the blade in Jack's hand had hesitated at this demon's heart. It had found something down there it would not cut, and Jack had learned in 100 years to trust the sword over his own judgment, because the sword saw truer than he did, and it had told him that under the 1,000 years of murder there was still a man. "Go," Jack said. Akaza stared at him, uncomprehending, one arm ash, the sun cresting the mountains behind him. "The sword will not take your heart," Jack said, "because there is something in it worth sparing, buried though it is. I will not do with my hand what my blade refuses. Go, before the sun does what neither of us will. But know this, warrior." And here the samurai's tired eyes held the demon's wild ones, and his voice was gentle and absolute. "The thing you are running from is not me, and it is not this blade. It is the man you were. He is still down there. And one day the running will stop, because it always does. And when it does, I hope you are brave enough to remember him. You were a warrior once, before you were a monster. Be one again. That is a harder fight than any we had tonight, and it is the only one that will ever set you free." For one heartbeat, Akaza did not move. Something crossed his ruined face. Not gratitude. He had no framework left for that. But a raw, cracked, bewildered seeing. The look of a thing that has been shown a door it did not know existed. His hand drifted, once more, to the place on his chest the blade had refused to open. Then the sun broke fully over the ridge, and the demon fled. A blur of blue light, diving into the last shadow of the valley, into the deep places where the light could not reach. Gone, not dead. Marked, cracked open in a way 1,000 years of Muzan's mercy had never managed, carrying a wound no regeneration could close. The memory of a man who had looked into him and found something worth sparing. And then the dawn came all the way up, and washed the whole valley gold. The survivors wept in the light. 200 people stood in the wreck of the Mugen Train and felt the sun on their faces, and understood, most of them without knowing why, that they had been very close to never feeling it again. Rengoku stood breathing hard in the gold light, alive. His heart still beating behind the ribs a demon had come a half-meter from stopping, and he turned to the samurai who had thrown himself into that killing line, and for once the flame Hashira had no ferocious cheer, only a quiet and enormous gravity. "You saved my life," Rengoku said, "and then you let an upper moon walk away into the dark, when killing it would have been the surer thing. The Corps would call the second a grave error." He studied Jack. "Tell me why you did it, swordsman. Not the sword. You." Jack watched the place in the shadows where the demon had vanished. "Because I have spent 100 years fighting a darkness that hollows people out and wears them like a coat," he said. "And I have learned that you do not defeat that darkness only by killing what it makes. Sometimes you defeat it by reaching the person still buried inside and calling them back to themselves, and trusting that a seed set in the right ground will grow in its own time." He sheathed the blade, and it went silent. "I do not know if he will remember what he was. Perhaps he will die a monster after all. But my sword said there was a man in there worth sparing, and my sword has never once lied to me. So I spared him, and I planted something. That is all a swordsman like me can ever really do. Cut what must be cut, spare what can be saved, and leave the seed to the years." Rengoku looked at him for a long moment in the gold morning light. Then, slowly, the ferocious warmth came back into the flame Hashira's face, and he laughed. A great glad, ringing laugh that startled the songbirds in the old woman's cage. "The Corps has never had anyone like you," he said, "and I do not think it ever will again." The morning after was the kind Jack had not been given in 100 years, a quiet one, in the sun, with everyone he had fought beside still alive to see it. The Corps' crows came at first light, and after them the Kikushi in their black uniforms, the hidden ones who cleaned up after Slayer battles, bearing the wounded away on stretchers, taking down the names of the dead among the earlier vanished, moving the 200 dazed survivors gently toward carts that would carry them home to towns that had almost lost them. It was an enormous, practiced, sorrowful efficiency, and Jack watched it with the recognition of a man who had seen the aftermath of 1,000 battles. Someone always had to gather the living and count the gone. In every world, in every age, it was the same work, and it was never finished. Tanjiro found him at the edge of it, where the wreck of the train gave way to the tree line. "You could have killed Akaza," the boy said. It was not an accusation. His ember eyes were troubled and searching. "An upper moon. No one has killed an upper moon in a century, and you let him go." My blade would not take him, Jack said. It found something in him it would not cut. I have learned to trust it more than I trust myself. He looked down at the boy, this gentle child who carried his demon sister through the daylight in a box on his back, who had wept when Jack said Nezuko was not evil, who fought the dark without ever once losing his tenderness toward it. You understand this better than anyone I have met here, Tanjiro. You have spent 2 years insisting that a demon can still be human underneath. You were right. My sword agrees with you. That is a rarer thing than you know, in any world, to fight monsters your whole life and never once forget that most of them were people first. Tanjiro's eyes went bright, the way they did. Nezuko likes you, he said, a little helplessly. She trusts almost no one that fast. She's been sitting near your things all morning. Jack looked, and it was true. The demon girl had folded herself down beside his few belongings in the shade of an overturned car, out of the sun she could not bear, watching him with those startling pink eyes. And when she saw him look, she made the small chirping sound he now understood was, for her, a kind of hello. He inclined his head to her, gravely, one warrior to another, and something in her eyes crinkled that might have been a smile behind the bamboo. Rengoku came last, in the full gold of the risen day. The flame Hashira had washed the ash and blood from himself, and stood restored to his full ferocious brightness, and he clapped both hands down on Jack's shoulders with a force that would have staggered a smaller man. I have sent word to the master, he announced. Kagaya Ubuyashiki himself will want to know what came onto that train, a swordsman from no world we know, carrying a blade that ends demons the way only the sun can. The Corps has never had such a thing. Neither has our enemy. His bright eyes sobered a fraction. And that is the danger, Jack. Muzan felt Enmu die wrong. He will have felt Akaza flee. He knows now that there is a blade in his country that can do what he has spent 1,000 years believing only the sun could do. End him, truly and forever. He fears very little, but he will fear that, and he does not let the things he fears go on existing. I know, Jack said. He had known it since the night. I have spent my whole life being hunted by a great and ancient evil that cannot abide a thing it cannot control. Yours and mine are not so different. Muzan will send his best for me, as Aku always did, and I will meet them, as I always have. A tired ghost of a smile. It seems I do not get to lay the sword down in any age. Perhaps that is simply what the sword is for. Then you'll need the Corps, Rengoku said simply. And the Corps will be honored to have you. Stay. Fight with us. A blade like yours could turn this entire war. He said it with his whole bright certainty, and it was a good offer, and a true one, and Jack was quietly moved by it. But he shook his head, gently. I will help you where our roads run together, he said. I will not turn my back on this war while I am in this world. There are too many innocents in the dark, and I have the one blade that can reach the thing at the root of it. If Muzan sends his moons for me, I will be a shield the Corps can stand behind, and gladly. He looked east, past the mountains, toward a horizon that in this world would never be his own. But I am still trying to find my way home. 100 years I have wandered, thrown from land to land and age to age, always one road short of my father's country. I do not know how I came here. I do not know if there is a road back. But I have never yet stopped looking for one, and I cannot start now, even in a world as worthy as yours. He met the Hashira's bright eyes. So I will walk, and where my walking crosses your war, I will fight beside you. And when I find the road home at last, if I ever do, I will take it. That is the whole of what I can promise. It is the same promise I have kept for 100 years. Rengoku held his gaze for a long moment, and Jack braced for an argument. It did not come. Instead, the flame Hashira nodded, slowly, with the deep respect of one man of duty, recognizing another. A man should walk his own road, Rengoku said. Even I would not ask you off it. Go then, and look for your home, swordsman, and know that wherever this war finds you, you will find the Corps standing in it, and you will never fight the dark alone in this country again. He grinned, the great glad grin, and clapped Jack's shoulders one final time. Set your heart ablaze, Jack. And when Muzan's moons come for you, and they will come, burn them down. And so Jack walked out of the valley in the full light of morning, the god-forged blade quiet at his hip, the 200 saved streaming home behind him, a flame Hashira and a boy, and his gentle demon sister watching him go. Behind him lay a demon war he had not been born into and could not turn away from. Ahead lay a road, as there was always a road, curving toward mountains that were not the mountains of his home and might, if he walked far enough, someday become them. Far to the south, in the chamber no map recorded, Muzan Kibutsuji turned his ancient attention north, toward a blade that could end him, and began, coldly, patiently, with the terrible focus of a thing that had murdered every threat for 1,000 years, to plan the death of the samurai called Jack. And deep in a shadow the sun had not yet reached, an upper moon pressed a healed hand to a place on his chest where a blade had once refused to cut, and could not, for the life of him, stop remembering the face of a man who had looked into a monster and said there is still someone in there worth sparing. And, for the first time in 1,000 years, began, very slowly, and against his own terrified will, to try to remember who that someone had been. The demon war did not end that morning. It never ended in a single morning, but it had changed, quietly and completely, in a way none of them could yet measure. A weapon walked the country now that the progenitor of demons had spent 1,000 years believing could not exist, a blade that ended his kind as cleanly as the sun, in a hand that could not be corrupted, seduced, or turned, carried by a warrior who had already outlasted one ancient darkness, and did not frighten easily. Muzan knew it, and feared it, and would hunt it. The core knew it, and hoped, and somewhere in the dark, an upper moon carried a crack in his certainty that would not close, a seed set in old and bitter ground, growing in its own slow time. Jack walked on. He had saved 200 lives, spared a monster the sword said was still a man, and set an ancient evil to fearing him, and none of it had brought him a single step closer to home. That was the shape of his curse, and he had made his peace with it long ago. To be forever the stranger who arrives when the dark is worst, does what only he can do, and walks on before the morning he bought for others, can become a morning of his own. But he had not walked alone last night. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he had stood shoulder to shoulder with warriors who understood him, in a war that was worth the fighting, under a sun that meant something. And as he crested the ridge and the valley fell away behind him, the tired samurai found that the loneliness sat a little lighter on him than it had in 100 years. There was a road ahead. There was always a road. And Jack, son of an emperor, exile of 100 worlds, keeper of a blade forged from the essence of what is good, set his feet upon it and walked east, toward the risen sun, still looking for the way home, and ready, whenever the dark should call, to turn back and fight.